What's up? Chelsea Rose here. I'm about to edit some photos, so I thought I would just share a little bit of my process with you guys. So I am here in Lightroom, and I have this awesome photo of my friend Gretchen that I took. All right, so I'm gonna start with the lighting here. Let's just experiment with the lighting. So I'm gonna go to the curves here and put in 3 little dots. I'm gonna adjust this middle one. These are our midtones. So I'm gonna push that a little bit. It looks like it adds some contrast. We just wanna be careful that we don't blow out these highlights too much here. We can even take this slider, these are our highlights up here, and bring them down a little bit. Let's experiment with that. Another option is we have in our light panel these sliders here, so we can mess with the highlights here. See, if we turn those up, then she looks super white, pale. So we can even bring those down a little bit. There are a lot of shadows on her face, so I'm going to mess with the shadow slider here. However, I do like the contrast. And I do want to keep that contrast, so I don't want to get rid of too many shadows, but let's experiment with that a bit. I like to just bring it all the way up and see what that does, and then we'll bring it down from there. So I'm going to leave it right about there. Now I'm going to mess with the tones a little bit. There's a lot of blues I'm seeing in here. It's very cold and I want it to be a lot warmer. So what I like to do just right off the bat is in our color panel here, I'm going to take this yellow slider and just bump it up a notch. I don't like to use this too much because then you just get that kind of crazy sepia tone, fake looking. So I'm just going to use this to bump up the yellows just a little bit. We also have this green magenta slider here, so you can mess with that. I'm going to bring in a little bit more magenta. All right, now I want to warm up her skin a little bit. So I'm going to experiment with some reds. Over in our color curves here, I'm going to select red, put in my 3 dots here. And this middle one, our midtones, I'm going to bring that up and see what that looks like. So we have some reds there. It does look like a little unnatural. So I'm just going to do it a tiny bit. And then I'm going to do the same with the highlights. Let's see what that looks like. Bring it up just a tad. And let's see what the shadows do if we add in a little red. That's kind of nice. Yeah, just a little bit. All these little adjustments make a big difference. Okay, so now let's go to our yellow and our blue. I'm going to put in my 3 dots for our shadows, midtones, and highlights. And let's bring a little bit of yellow into the midtones here. See what that looks like. Okay, I'm liking that. I think this could use a little more color overall, so I'm going to slide down here to the vibrant slider. Let's just bring that up, and our saturation, let's bring that up. Ooh, that's kind of nice. Brings out those greens. If we want to adjust the greens, we also have this color mixer here, just in that little pop-down menu, so you can select your green slider. You can make it more green. You can make it more yellow green or a more bluer green. I kind of like where it's at, just more natural looking. You can also make it brighter, but I'm liking where that's at. So just so you know, that option is there. And let's see what this is looking like so far. I'm gonna hit the slash key on my keyboard. So this is gonna show me my before and my after. So it's looking pretty good. Another thing I like to do to just make it look a little more ethereal and dreamy is I like to go to the effects panel here and turn the texture down. I'm putting it at about 28. That just adds like a nice kind of glow, soft glow. So this is looking pretty good. Might add in a little more yellow. Maybe that's a bit too much. Another thing we can do if you're working with lighter skin is you can adjust this orange slider here, adjust the saturation, make it a little more orange. And if you want to see where that orange actually is, where it's actually hitting, you can take the luminance and that's going to light up the orange spot. So I'm just going to turn that all the way up so it's showing me where that orange actually is. And you can use this to make that brighter, but like I said, I don't want to lose too much of the detail in her face in the shadows. So I'm not going to mess with the luminance too much. Bump the saturation just a little bit. It's looking pretty good. It does still feel pretty cool to me, so I'm going to mess with this curve here, our green and our magenta. Just click here for these dots. And I'm going to experiment with adding in a little more magenta. I'm going to try it in my shadows. Let's see what that looks like. Let's try the highlights. These are very, very, very subtle adjustments. But it's looking pretty good. Now her eyes are in the shadow, so they look a little dark, so we can brighten her eyes with the brush tool. So I'm gonna go over here to my brush, and you can adjust the size of the brush on your keyboard with the bracket keys to make it bigger or smaller. So I'm gonna just brighten up her eyes a little bit. So I'm just going to, let's see, I'm going to turn the shadows up a little bit, turn the exposure up a little bit, and brush that over her eyes. A lot on the pupil here, and then a little bit around her eyes, a little bit on this one. Not so much on the whites of the eye, because we don't want that to look unnaturally white, but just these shadow areas. So I have them selected. Very subtle, but I can adjust these sliders now to see what that's doing. If I bring up this exposure, you can see the difference it's making in her eyes. Again, I don't want it to be too unnatural. I'm gonna bring those shadows up. And I'm gonna add a little bit of saturation too to bring out the color, just a tad bit in her eyes. So I'm gonna now go back to my other editing. I can either hit E on the keyboard or click this edit panel here. Click on the photo to zoom out and see what that's looking like. That looks pretty good. You can look at our before and our after. If you want to see what that's doing to her eyes there, before, after. Just a little bit of brightness in there. And I'm gonna add a little bit more warmth in the shadows. A little bit more yellow. Maybe let's try a little bit more red. I feel like that does take away from the green a little bit though. And then I like the green of the plants around her. So I'm gonna leave it at that, and now let's crop. So we can hit the crop over here, or the C button will bring us to crop. I like to go with the 4x5 because that fits Instagram well. Let's see what that looks like. Just hit enter to crop that. And that's looking pretty good. Mess with the contrast a little bit. So if you want a lot of contrast, you can push that. If you want less, kind of like where we're at. Just the highlights a little bit. If we want it to be more subtle, those highlights are pretty bright. Let me turn the exposure down just a hair. Bring the highlights back up. Let's see, let's mess with the shadows again. All right, I'm liking where this is at. This is our before. Not a lot of color there, very blue, kind of pale looking. And then this is our after. So it's a lot more warm, a little more glowy. And as always, I like to take a step away and then I'll come back to this later with fresh eyes and probably make some more adjustments, but this is a pretty good start. So I hope you enjoyed this little editing tutorial.